Hey, this is Randall Foster from Symphonic Distribution. You are listening to Your Morning Coffee, the podcast with my friends Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart. Weekly music news for the new music business.
From Jesse Kirshbaum, 2023 Music Industry Predictions.
From Complete Music Update, the music business review of the year 2022.
From Pitchfork, Confronting Music's Mental Health Crisis.
And from Randall Foster, what is your purpose? Yes, what is your purpose? What is my purpose? Well, my purpose is to start the show, and this is our year-end episode. My goodness, we are wrapping up 2022. We are glad you are here. And with that, let us start the podcast right about now.
Stand by for transmission.
This is London calling.
Wake up! The revolution is at hand!
Your morning coffee is on the air.
Standing by.
Your morning coffee, the weekly music news for the new music business. It's the highly curated, agitated, advocated, moderated, and liberated digital music information that you need to know. We are your digital music authority. And now from our studios in Hollywood, California, here's your hosts, Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart.
Jay, how did this year go so fast? That's what I want to know.
It really did, didn't it?
Oh, I look in the mirror and go, what is my dad doing looking back at me? And I realize with the lines on my face, the years are adding up. But man, this year just blew by. Unbelievable.
Yeah, it really did. I think we have a warped perception of time with the pandemic and all of the the lockdown and just all of that. It's really twisted the way I look at the last few years.
Yes.
And time is going by very, very quickly.
It really is. And as they say too, the older you get, the more or the lesser percentage a year is of your life, and therefore it feels faster the older you get. And as I mentioned, when I look in the mirror, I am getting older, Jay. I hate to admit it, but I am getting older. And so these years just blow on by. And there was so much news. So many things happened this year that we covered and talked about. And it was just a remarkable year. And of course, with the onslaught of tours, it was a year, at least for me, and I think for you too, I saw more darn shows than I have in ages. And it was great. It was fantastic.
Yeah. When something's taken away from you, you appreciate it a little bit more, right? Yes. And when live shows got taken away from us, we had some live streams and some of them were amazing, but it's not the same thing. And now that we're back to live music again, I think we appreciate it a little bit more.
Yes, I think we do. And the year-end version of the newsletter was fantastic. There's some great stuff in there, and when I was looking at everything and I started reading the different articles, it is chock full of stuff that you have to check out, including a fascinating article on Ticketmaster. Really good stuff. So
and I didn't put that Ticketmaster thing too high up. I don't want to draw too much attention to it because, actually, I saw a piece that Bob Lefsetz had written about that piece, and while some of it is accurate, some of it,
conjecture.
I don't know. It can be challenged, and I didn't want to start that debate all over again. But I do think it's an interesting read. One of the things that happened this last week, which you and I were thrilled about, was that Variety Magazine listed our humble podcast as one of the 10 best music business podcasts. So thank you to Roy Trakin and Shirley Halpern and the great team over there at Variety. We were honored and humbled and surprised, and thought that was just really cool.
Flattered indeed. And as we have said, not relating to this at all, but the coverage of the music industry that Variety does now is just fantastic. It is an absolute go-to resource for both of us, and we really, really appreciate that and are humbled by that inclusion in that list. Very kind of them.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, and I got to say, I know your Behind the Setlist podcast dropped with Chris Isaak, and
oh yeah,
what a cool guy he is, isn't he?
He really is, and I've always liked Chris Isaak. I had such a great conversation with him. Glenn and I did. He's funny. He's like wicked smart.
Yes, he is.
He's got a wicked sense of humor. And he's just got this experience about him. And there's just something very comforting about listening to him talk about Christmas music. And I think we grew up on a lot of the same Christmas music, you know, the Burl Ives of the world, you know, and the Vince Guaraldi and the Peanuts Christmas and all of that stuff. And it was just a fun conversation. So if you get a chance, it just dropped Behind the Setlist with Chris Isaak. Fun interview.
Well,
thanks for bringing
and we were talking about before we hit play again. I was in the Warner family at the time when both that Chris Isaak record with Wicked Game and the Katie Lang record came out, that Greg Penny produced, and those were both. There were so many fans of both of those artists inside the building, and that was my first real experience of watching. Or seeing just kind of the commitment to artistry and the commitment to those artists. And prior to that, they had lots of not a lot of commercial success. They had a lot of kind of success in terms of reviews and other musicians being fans, but they weren't selling big records. But boy, the Warner team but
they stuck with it, right?
They stuck with it, absolutely. They stuck with it, and well into. And I saw that with Faith No More too. That band that was on the label at the time, and so you really get a chance back in those days of seeing the Warner commitment to artistry and to sticking with artists and waiting for that magic. And when it does come, kind of really lining up all the things that need to happen and pushing the button, and patience, which we don't see.
Yeah, because they were a lot more than their big singles at the time. Katie Lang had Constant Craving, and but she was so much more than that. And just like Chris Isaak, they were kind of critics' darlings.
Yes.
They really, and then they were also in the industry. People really took note of both of them. And I know with Chris Isaak, he played with, or at least got to jam with, Roy Orbison and Johnny Cash and people like that.
I mean,
you don't get too much bigger of a compliment than that.
No. Pretty sweet. By the way, Jay, as we wrap up this year's show, we must thank our sponsors. Boy, we are so appreciative of having them. And it doesn't get better than the folks that we have helping us with the show every week, including Bandzoogle. Built by musicians for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform that makes it easy to build a beautiful website and EPK for your music. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in. Hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, tools to sell your music and merch commission-free crowdfunding and fan subscription features, mailing list tools to grow your fan list and send newsletters, social media integrations, and live support from their musician-friendly team 7 days a week. Your Morning Coffee podcast listeners could jump over to bandzoogle.com and try it free for 30 days. Just use the promo code Morning Coffee, all one word, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. That's bandzoogle.com, promo code Morning Coffee.
Yes, sir. And we're also brought to you by Hypebot. Since 2004, Hypebot has chronicled the new music business and the trends and technologies that are all changing how the music is discovered, consumed, marketed, monetized. It's edited daily by founder Bruce Houghton with help from Alana Bonilla. Hypebot and sister blog Music Think Tank are published by live music discovery and marketing platform Bands in Town. And just really quickly, I wanted to mention Bruce did a story about you and me this last week where we share our favorite Your Morning podcast episodes of 2022. And those episodes, just really quickly, we talked about the Mercuriadis episode, the Will Page episode, and then one that was one of my personal favorites was when I visited Colorado State and they surprised me by greeting me by reciting the intro to our podcast in unison. So
love that.
Thank you for a great year, Bruce, and everybody over at Hypebot.
Yes, indeed. And by the way, Bands in Town, over 74 million live music fans trust Bands in Town to get personalized concert alerts, recommendations, and messages from their favorite artists. It's the #1 artist service platform connecting over 560,000 artists with their superfans. Managers, labels, agencies, and artists access their own dashboard to manage and promote their tour dates across all platforms.
Yes, and finally, the Music Business Association. For more than 6 decades, the Music Biz Conference has been the point of origin for inspiration, collaboration in the music business. So join us in Nashville, May 15 through 18.
Yes, indeed. By the way, the Music Business Association, Bands Who Go Hypebot, and Bands in Town, big thanks, and we certainly appreciated it. And I appreciate my brother, Jay Gilbert, because this is episode number 124. It's essentially 124 lunches that we've recorded. Because these things,
That's crazy.
This is what our lunches were like when we used to get together before we did a podcast. But if you don't know Jay, well, you better know Jay. He's a music industry consultant. He's the curator of the weekly Your Morning Coffee newsletter and a former executive with Universal Music, Sony Music, Warner Music Groups, and Fox Home Entertainment.
And my handsome co-host over here is Mike Etchart, longtime host of Sound and Vision Radio, formerly of SST Records, Warner Music, Capital EMI, and Universal Music Groups.
Indeed. Well, Jay, what do you say we jump into some of these wonderful
stories?
stories?
Well, wait, before we do, you had told me about a really cool documentary, and I watched it, and I wanted to talk about it just for a couple of minutes because you are my go-to guy when it comes to document. You always have been. And whenever you tell me about one, I always watch it. And this one was so much better than I thought it was going to be, because you think with some of these things that maybe you've seen it all. And this one is How Abbey Road Studios, let's see, the documentary is called If These Walls Could Sing. Mm-hmm. And there was a Billboard piece that talks about how it came together. And that kind of just whet my appetite for it. But what did you think? I mean, just when you think you've seen it all, right?
Yeah. It was a great document. It's on Disney Plus, by the way, and it was put together. I don't know if the director or Mary McCartney was involved, Paul's daughter, and who's also a photographer like her mom was. And there's a great picture they show of her basically on a blanket as like about a 6 or 8 month old baby,
toddler.
They're being at the studio, and of course, she grew up there, and it was really fascinating. And they do a great deep dive on the history of the studio, and of course, it was called EMI Studios until 1973, but everybody referred to it as Abbey Road because it's on Abbey Road, 3 Abbey Road, and and it just kind of shows the history from EMI and all the great acts that have been there. And then long conversations with Paul McCartney and Roger Waters and Shirley Bassey and lots of different artists over the years that have recorded there, and all just the magic of that place. And it's fascinating.
Yeah, my favorite quote was when they were talking to Paul McCartney about, why he chose, even after the Beatles, when he was doing his solo stuff, why he recorded at other studios from time to time, but he would always go back to Abbey Road. And he said, all the microphones work. He said that's not really true everywhere else.
That's right.
And, when you see Roger Waters talking about, Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, or, the guys from Oasis, and it's not just pop and rock. In fact, it really didn't start out that way at all. No. It's classical, right? Direct to disc, and some jazz. And, Elton John did some early sessions there. And I think you were telling me a funny story about Elton, when I told you that I had forgotten that he played piano on the Hollies' He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother.
Yes, he did. And also on Bang a Gong by T-Rex.
T-Rex.
Yeah, and he would, and Greg Penny told me this, that Elton would just, there's like a cafe or a pub across the street, and he would just go there every day and sit there because all the engineers and producers knew he was there. So if they needed a piano player on short notice, somebody would walk across the street and say, hey, we got a session for you. And he'd come over and play on it. And, Yeah, and he's of course featured in it, talking about the magic of that place. And what's interesting is there's still a handful of people there that have been there for the last 45 years. And
isn't that crazy?
Yeah, and they have
Well, you and I were talking. We're gonna go over there sometime.
That is Mecca truly to us to go over there and check it out. So we hope to. If you get a moment, folks, check it out. It is on Disney Plus, and it is well worth the hour and a half time to watch it. It's really interesting. And
once again, it's called If These Walls Could Sing. Mm-hmm. And the last thing I'll say on it is one part that I didn't know before I saw the documentary was that Paul explained that part of the Capitol contract that they signed for recording gave them limitless recording time.
Yes.
And so they could come and go as they pleased. And, a lot of artists don't have that. And when you couple that with a great producer, a band that is ridiculously talented, not only as musicians, but as world-class songwriters, and then you give them this unlimited canvas to paint on, now I think we understand how some of these things were made.
Absolutely. And by the way, we talked last week about the Bono book, which I am halfway through right now. So that is a great book. And if any of you are sitting around looking for a cool book to read, that is a good one.
Are you reading the physical book or are you listening to the audiobook?
I'm reading the physical book, yes. And then I'm going to go back and do the audiobook afterwards.
Yeah, it's a whole different experience. The audiobook, because every chapter is based on a song, and he's doing a different version of those songs. I hope they put that out as an album or something. But I love audiobooks, always have. But I think you're really going to enjoy the audiobook, especially after reading the physical book, because it just takes on a whole new meaning.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, now we're going to get into the stories. What do you say, Jay?
Yes.
The first one is from Jesse Kirshbaum, 2023 music industry projections, and it's in two parts. So it's really...
Well, one is kind of a recap of 2022, I think. Let me look at this really quickly. It's Music Business Review. Yeah, the first one is a Music Business Review of 2022. And actually, you know what? I'm looking at the next story. I'm skipping ahead. So 2023 music industry projections. Let's just jump in. Jesse runs this really cool site, if you haven't checked it out, called Beats and Bytes.
Yes.
BYTES, Beats and Bytes. And they've got all sorts of great coverage that we look to all the time. And we've run this before in your morning coffee. And there are a few things that... he says, here are some key trends that we saw from the year. And the first one is 100,000 songs a day. In a world where there's this much content dropping, the curators are almost more important than the creatives. That was a bold statement. But he's not wrong. Consistency is now the primary game in town. And that's something that you had mentioned, in our pregame when we were just talking about life, love, and the pursuit of happiness, that today, whether it's streaming, TikTok, whatever it is, you brought it up. Consistency is now that's the key.
Absolutely. Sticking with it, without a doubt. He also mentioned TikTokification. The same way MTV impacted the radio star, TikTok impacted the pop star. Songs are getting shorter. Yeah. Bridges have all but disappeared. Advertising campaigns are incorporating dances, and Gen Z is getting its news on TikTok. Culture is being shifted by this platform for better or worse. And boy, we're going to be talking about TikTok for sure, all into 2023.
Yeah, we've been talking about that a lot, that all those deals are coming due, or they're going to be renegotiated soon between TikTok and the majors. They're happening right now, and that's going to be key. And, we have to balance that promotion versus the commerce that they generate. I think they generated something like 12 billion in the last year. So it's a real thing. The next one is the end of the genre. Songs are now categorized by vibes and moods. So true. Genre bending is the status quo, and the artist's ability to create a movement is more important than their stylistic choices. And I still think that we're in this old world mentality, like radio, where it has to be siloed, that this is R&B or you listen to jazz. But then there are these these playlists we talk about, like Pollen and some of these that are really starting to be more based on either a genre or less on a genre and more on a mood or on a demographic. So I think he's absolutely right, that not only is that kind of what's been happening in this last year, but we're going to see more of it in 2023.
Right. Of course, he also mentions the year of Bad Bunny and global superstars. And of course, we started talking about Bad Bunny earlier this year, which led us to our friend Bruno Del Granado down in Miami. As he says here, big artists need to be global now, not just big in America. And Bad Bunny is the prime example. Marketing your campaign globally is the whole shebang. 10 years ago, top 5 superstars generated 15% of Warner's revenue. Now the majority of money is coming from being a truly global entertainment company operating in over 70 countries. For the superstars, it's no longer a hits business. It's a global business. And for the rest of the industry,
it really is.
Yeah, so much similar. It's not so much about hits, but focusing on fandom and the many ancillary revenue streams that being an artist can provide. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think the industry is now looking and understanding how huge Latin music is, for example. And we know about, K-pop, but that's just scratching the surface. It's more of a global world today. And then coming back to the regional angle, the next point is city-to-city marketing. If you're not going global, you better be going hyper-regional, he says. Scenes, what does it say? Scenes are back, baby. How you run a marketing campaign in Cleveland is different than how you run one in L.A. or Paris. And that's really true. One of the first things we talk about when we're looking to set up a release cycle is who's the audience? We got to find your tribe. You may know who your tribe is. Maybe you don't. Who do you want your audience to be, and who is it? And it can be just hyper regional. But to get back to that last point, once you've had some degree of success, we can see how it is that global marketplace today more than any other time that I can remember.
Yeah, absolutely. He also mentions, again, looking back than looking forward, but live streaming consolidation, live streaming content and commerce are sure shots in his mind, he says. It's just a matter of time. A lot of indies tried to stand up brands during the pandemic, but as the dust settles, it's clear the big companies are taking control and building out the live streaming industry. And you've talked about this a lot during when we were in the pandemic, how important it is for artists to understand that, especially when there was no touring around and that live streaming things changed. It was a super positive thing for many artists. So for sure.
It really was. And there was actually some that made some revenue from it. The next one is Web3 is building the future. Web3 is gaining ground in music and will enhance all facets of the business, just as it did during the first 2 major online evolutions: merch, fan clubs, ticketing, direct-to-consumer relationships, pricing, royalty payments, and content creation itself are being affected. And I think that's true, but it's not lived up to the hype yet. And the folks that I know in the space, they're doing some really interesting things with tying physical and digital together and, looking at virtual worlds and all of these things. But, there's a lot of hype around it too. And I think part of that was that whole NFT gold rush and the confusion surrounding a lot of, is that, does the emperor really have any clothes on? Right. So I think Web3, that the underlying technology behind, Web3, whether it's digital collectibles or DAOs or, any of these things, I think that's solid. That blockchain, if that's involved in what you're doing there, I think there's some really great platforms and services coming out right now that are really going to help the music industry. But it's evolving.
It's evolving. That's right. One of the next ones he talks about virtual performers, events, and merch. So much happening in the virtual space, it's hard to tell what's most promising. And he mentions he's most excited about brands bridging the gap between the metaverse and the physical world with products and performances. Avatars are on stage at Rolling Loud. NFT companies are making sneakers, and it's starting to feel the good kind of weird. Well, there you go.
The next one is nostalgic brand building. 2022 was big on nostalgia. From when we were Young Festival being a hit, to the revival of brands like Winamp, Napster, and LimeWire, for the Web3 era. This year, nostalgia went from a powerful marketing tactic to a great way to launch and build a new brand. And we've seen some of these, nostalgic brands kind of come back in one form or another. And for me, it's always kind of refreshing to kind of and comforting to see some of those names come back.
Yeah, absolutely. He says AI is finally having a moment. He says it's flooding culture. Lensa's got some problems, but it's following it's proving the interest is there. He says I'm waiting for a robot to have a hit in 2023. It feels inevitable. Ooh.
By the way, speaking of AI, have you heard of that Chat GPT yet? Have you ever played with that?
You told me about it, but I haven't tried it out yet. But you said it's fantastic.
When you get a chance, oh my gosh, it's not just artificial intelligence. It's this whole next wave of technology where, think of it this way: when you sign up for Chat GPT, it's free, and you can get in on this kind of test, and then ask it to write you a story or ask you to explain something to you about music publishing or about politics or whatever it is. It's not going on the web and finding stuff and pulling it back for you. It's got this knowledge base from pulling information that it actually creates a unique answer for you, and it's fast. And it's really, really cool. And they do have some guardrails on there, so you're not going to ask it how to build a bomb or do something
nefarious,
that's bad. Yes, but I'd heard about it. I got on a plane a while back and I played with it a little bit, and I was just stunned at how good it really is. Now, there are some disclaimers. It's not 100% accurate. So there are people who have written papers for school projects with Chat GPT. There were doing a story on the news the other night, and the whole newscast was written by Chat GPT.
Wow.
And you would never know it. I mean, it was flawless. So anyway, as we were talking about artificial intelligence, AI, I just wanted to recommend for our audience to kind of get out and take a look at that. Jumping over to, kind of the second part of this, where Jesse really goes into, some really interesting trends that he saw in 2022, like what he calls Web 2.5. He said Web 3 isn't ready for prime time. We'll see more cases and more intermediary steps, digital collectibles, fan club communities, digital ticketing, AR and VR, metaverse, all this kind of stuff, on the blockchain. And for a lot of listeners, their eyes are going to gloss over and they're just going to go, what the hell are you talking about? Don't feel stupid if you don't know a lot of this stuff. It's been around about a week and a half. Mm-hmm. We're all just learning about it. Think of, Web3 or, some of these things as, think of it like on the virtual side where it's not a physical thing. It's like, you're playing a game and it's a virtual world and you have an avatar and you can buy clothes for it, or, you have a digital collectible that may or may not be attached to something that's physical. It's not as scary as you think it is. But as my grandfather always said, an idiot is someone who doesn't know what you just found out, mm-hmm. right? So don't fall for the hype. Don't feel stupid if you don't know this stuff. You can Google a lot of it, but it's in its infancy right now. And it's just, we're just trying to figure out how we're going to make this a part of the music industry.
Yeah, one of his predictions, not surprisingly, is Twitter dies in the court of public appeal. He mentions that he's sick of the toxicity of Twitter, and he's saying it just doesn't feel good on the platform right now. And he thinks there's a better home for our conversation. And he thinks feeling music tastemakers are going to help scale the new short-form news and messaging platforms. May your last tweet be your best one. So that is going to be interesting to see what happens with Twitter over the next year.
It does feel like there's a change. And remember, there was a time not that long ago when MySpace was the king of the
mm-hmm.
hill. And, it seems like a long, long time ago, it really wasn't. And some of these things are cyclical. And just because you're the big dog on campus, like there was a time, again, not that long ago when downloads were a major part of the music industry. Downloads. And it was iTunes. And I couldn't imagine at that point of, because of the evolution of going, from ownership, to access. I really couldn't think ahead that celestial jukebox that we used to talk about was going to happen as fast as it did. The next one, hip hop, 50 years old.
Whoa.
Next year marks the 50th anniversary of the most important cultural force in our lifetimes. He says that I'm greatly indebted to hip hop and still as obsessed as ever. Hip hop's 50th will be the party of the year all year long. Can you imagine? That's 50 years of hip hop.
That doesn't seem right, to be honest. That means I was like, I guess what are they considering the first hip hop track? That's the question. But still,
Rapper's Delight, probably. I'm guessing.
Could be,
early 70s.
Yeah, well, that would be it. That would be correct. So, oh my gosh, time, as we mentioned earlier, time flies. He also mentioned Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, and Disney. Dominant companies are only becoming stronger, smarter, and better equipped for the future. They're looking recession-proof, if you ask me. I'm long for all of them if they sidestep legislation and keep shaving costs. Look for Apple's metaverse headset and marketplace to be a game changer. We'll see.
Yeah.
It's
we'll
see.
I think that's a good point. The next one is vinyl continues to grow, and we talk about this a lot. We see it a lot. It's still happening. There's still capacity issues. A friend of mine was telling me that one of the things that really drags down that capacity is just everybody wants a color variant today.
Yes.
And they want multiple color variants for one release. And when you do that, you have to break down the machines, clean them, takes more time. So vinyl continues to grow. In a digital first world, physical continues to grow in relevance. He says, I'm getting deeper into vinyl, and I think others will too. And don't forget about CDs. I was talking to Terry Courier from Music Millennium not that long ago, and he was telling me that, they're still doing a lot on, with CDs. And it may not be the whole driver, but since there is this scarcity with a lot of vinyl today, that some people will come into his store and say, I want this vinyl piece. Oh, it's not available. I'll take the CD.
Yeah.
As crazy as that sounds.
Right. And even on the collectible side, there's still a lot of stuff that hasn't made it over to streaming. And just like there's a lot of stuff that didn't make it from vinyl to CD. And so there's still a fair amount of things that you can only get on CD. And so I still have, although we were both mentioning that we need to update our CD playback systems in our homes, which doesn't get a lot of use so much these days. But one of the things that this next piece, here's the next point, I should say, vintage marketplace. Vintage collectibles in the physical form lend themselves to the blockchain in a very smart way. I think we'll begin to track the sale and value of these items, and all of a sudden we'll have our own marketplace of cool stuff. Think MySpace meets Facebook Marketplace. But I can tell you I kind of pay attention to vintage guitars and kind of vintage old musical instruments, and that stuff has just skyrocketed in price since the pandemic. So I think these kind of things, physical collectibles are still hot, without a doubt.
Yeah, I agree. One of the points he had in here, which I thought was really interesting, is marketing creators. With more creators creating, marketing services become more important than ever. There's a hole in the market in how to get creators and musicians off the ground. He says, I'd expect an agency, platform, or suite of services to emerge to fill this void because breaking through the noise is such a pain point. And that's really what I do in my consulting, what I do with my company Label Logic, is a lot of that. And it's a whole new world today. We talk about there's 100,000 tracks uploaded on average every day. How do you rise above that clutter? Mm-hmm. How do you, reach and grow an audience? That's the challenge, and it's different for every artist, and not only every artist, but every release. You have to sit down and look at who that audience is, how you're going to reach them. And what you mentioned a few minutes ago, that consistency is key to all of this. But I thought that was a good point.
Yeah, I don't think he's talking about us, but it sort of applies to us. And this next one, Jay, newsletters and podcasts merge. He says this might be a hope or need, but there are so many great podcasts and newsletters now that somebody has to bring them together. How nice would it be to have every article available as an audio version and every newsletter to have podcast audio as well? This is the future of content. Read along or listen at 2 times the speed. Whoever figures out how to create this click to listen button will win the newsletter and podcast game.
Yeah, I think we're part of the way there.
part of the way.
That we have this podcast that really breaks down and talks about the newsletter. The part that's missing is not fully missing, and that is that I'm seeing a lot more articles that have a button next to it where you can listen to the article. And there's two types of audio that I hear. One is where you have the author just reading the article, and that's rare, but it's really amazing when they do it. The other one is really more of kind of that computer generated, audio of text.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, absolutely. So a lot of great stuff here. Things to talk about and think about. And, we've got a glimpse of it. We certainly have a glimpse of it this last year, and it's going to be interesting to see where we head next year. It's going to be fun. It's going to be fun.
And thanks to Jesse Kirshbaum for that really cool piece.
Absolutely.
Lots of great insights in there. And check out Beats and Bytes. A really great site.
For sure. The next article from Complete Music Update, the music business review of the year 2022. Looking back. And this is a very in-depth and interesting article. And this is a great, great website.
Yeah, we could spend a lot of time on this. So, we'll just go for some of the highlights. But this was written by Chris Cook and Andy Matt over there at Complete Music Update. And I'll kick it off with the first one is really the economics of streaming. And this is one of the most important ones, in this kind of two-piece article is that, in his annual review of wider music rights sector, Will Page, our friend, declared that this year in music, quote, music copyright has never had it so good, end quote. After his study estimated that global revenues for the recorded music industry and music publishing sector in 2021 reached almost $40 billion, on the back of the ongoing streaming boom.
Yeah, that's a lot of money pretty soon. But again, it's it's still tough to make money with streaming if you're an artist, unless you're the very few at the top. But it's fascinating how it was really good news this year that the revenues will be increasing. And I think that's probably one of the things that I know we're most excited about as we head out of 2022 into 2023. They also talk about the live industry. No secret that the COVID pandemic was catastrophic for live music, which was pretty much shut down for 18 months. And while the full capacity shows did return in some countries in late 2021, it really got rolling in 2022. Live Nation, the biggest music company in the world, was even more upbeat. It told investors in November that ticket sales for concerts this year were up 34% for the quarter and now stand at over 115 million tickets sold for shows this year, up 37% from this point in 2019. So a lot of excitement,
impressive.
A lot of bands out there. But, as we've also kind of talked about, because of that, and when you look at the inflation and how expensive it is to keep groups on the road, a lot of bands decided to stay home. And that's hopefully going to be, the inflation will be easing next year. But we've got a full winter of potential COVID variants. So it's going to be interesting to see how things roll out as we head into the spring.
Yeah, it's been a challenge. And I want to go through a couple more of these points here, but there's a piece from Pitchfork that we're going to be covering in a minute, and it dives a little bit deeper into just how the economics of touring is. Not only is it challenging on a financial level, but it's challenging on a mental health level as well. But we'll get to that in a second. The third one here is song theft lawsuits, and we saw a bunch of these, in the last year or so. The big one, the blurred lines ruling in the U.S., in 2015 concluded, that Robin Thicke and Pharrell Williams did infringe on the copyright of the Marvin Gaye track, Got to Give It Up. Well, that kind of set the stage, for what came later. Ed Sheeran was accused of ripping off a track called Oh Why by Sammy Chokri when writing his 2017 release Shape of You. But the track was supposedly ripped off. It wasn't that well known. And the fact that it was available to stream, was that enough of a claim, for the defendants had across earlier work before writing their songs? Secondly, if, as is often the case, the element shared by the newer song and the older song is a relatively short and pretty common musical segment, and we're seeing that too, can that allegedly borrowed element be protected by copyright isolation? And really the last thing I'll say on this copyright thing is, it's really sort of settled down. We have seen a few of these things like the Taylor Swift Shake It Off, which was recently settled. But hopefully this is an area that we're going to see a little bit less of.
Yeah, this next one too was interesting. Interpolation, and and I know the word, but I don't associate it with this thing, which is, as he goes on to say, if you've noticed to any amount of pop radio if you've listened, I should say, to any amount of pop radio in the last year, you can't have failed to notice the rise of interpolation in popular music. It's the incorporation of a portion or portions of an existing song into a new one. Unlike sampling, which actually integrates part of an existing recording, interpolation is part of the songwriting process and may, for example, involve using a melody but changing lyrics, creating something new but leaving the original source recognizable. And there was a ton of that stuff this year. And,
there was.
Yeah, and it's...
some good stuff, too.
Yes.
I mean, I would consider the Elton John Dua Lipa to be
without a doubt.
Interpolation as well, and they talk about why that is. And it makes a lot of sense. We're already familiar with that melody, for example. And if somebody puts new lyrics over a melody that we're already familiar with, we're already halfway in love with it, right?
Sure.
So there are some ways that, and this has been going on for decades, it's just now becoming more commonplace, especially in a short form video world like with TikTok, where, don't bore us, get to the chorus. You've got to have something familiar and catchy right away.
Yes. Yeah. And, I wonder if we're going to see more songs being pitched for interpolation, or you say it a little different. You say interpolation, and maybe that's the right pronunciation. I don't know.
You say tomato.
There you
I
go.
say tomato.
Exactly. But with the acquisition of catalogs, it would make sense to bring up the value of that might be pitched to different artists, of including certain songs. So we'll see as that rolls out over the next couple of years.
Yeah, and people are doing it to avoid getting sued too. Mm-hmm. So to your point, yes, publishers are now being a lot more assertive and aggressive about pitching things for interpolations, and that's new. Last year, Paramore's Hayley Williams and Joshua Farro were added as songwriters on Olivia Rodrigo's Good For You, but that was months after it came out. It had been widely pointed out that the new track bore a fairly vague similarity to Paramore's song Misery Business. But instead of even getting into it, it's like, look, we're going to put you on there. Yeah. They don't want to risk any kind of lawsuit or any of that. It's like, look, we'll just share in this. And I think that's interesting, and I think it could be healthy for the business as long as it doesn't get too crazy, because there's only so many notes and there's only so many, 1-4-5 songs out there that you're going to see similarities in these things. It's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. The last point on here is licensing on social media. Well, yeah, of course, for the music industry, it's always been pretty clear that when brands use music and promotional videos posted to platforms like YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, they need to secure bespoke sync licenses, because the music licensing deals secured by those social media and user upload platforms themselves only cover user-generated content. So very interesting. Nevertheless, some brands have in the past posted videos containing music to those platforms, assuming unwisely that the YouTube, Instagram, or TikTok music licenses would apply. This year, we got clarification in the U.S. courts that those brands are wrong, and the music industry is correct, with energy drink Bang being found liable for copyright infringement for failing to secure bespoke licenses for the music and social media videos. Uh-oh.
Yeah. Well, and they're also talking about influencers. At what point do you become a brand?
Yeah.
And that's what this article is really pointing to, is that if you are an influencer and you're posting things, user-generated content, you're protected under certain rights. But once you become that influencer who's making money and becoming successful, then you become a brand. And what is that tipping point? I think it's a really interesting conversation. It says, what about influencer content? At what point does an individual user uploading videos to a social platform cease to be a user in the context of those platforms' user-generated content music licenses? Arguably, in that domain, things are slightly more ambiguous. So, it's like a lot of this stuff, we always talk about how years ago we didn't have TikTok or we didn't have Peloton or we didn't have Twitch. We're going to have to, or even NFTs, we're going to have to develop these new rules for these new technologies. And we are doing that. And smart lawyers are deeply engaged in doing that. But it's a whole new music industry. So we're going to have to, learn and move with it.
Well, and this one ends with saying the music industry is slowly making it easier to secure such licenses, including for more grassroots creators, which is great. That is again part of the process, because it does take a while and it's hard to get those licenses. And so if that process is smoothed out a little bit easier and faster, well, that's just more revenue for the music companies for sure. And of course, it allows people to actually use them in the proper way, which is great.
Right. And just really quickly, there was a part 2 to this article, and I just want to touch on a couple of these really quickly. The first one, premium streaming, so digital services where users pay a monthly fee. And that's as opposed to some of these, DSPs have an ad supported where you can use the service for free in somewhat limited capacity, but you don't have to pay a monthly fee. So premium streaming continues to generate by far the most income for the recording industry. About 47.3% of global recorded revenues in 2021. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that as more people are actually subscribing. Yeah. And you're getting countries where traditionally they don't pay for subscriptions, where they are. And the last thing I'll say kind of on premium streaming is that, according to our friends over at Media, Spotify accounted for around 30.5% of premium subscribers in quarter 2 of this year, with Apple Music in second place, accounting for about almost 14%. I think that we're really looking at places like YouTube. And even though they do have a premium streaming service, we all know that the regular YouTube site is really the number one streaming service for music. And as Leor Cohen will tell you cheerfully that, they contributed about $6 billion last year to the music industry.
Yeah. I was kind of surprised, to be honest, that the number is not over 50% yet in terms of premium streaming accounting in terms of the global music revenues.
Yeah, in the U.S. it is, and in worldwide it is not yet.
Yeah.
But then again, streaming in the U.S. is about 83% of the business, and outside of the U.S. I think it's closer to like 68%, give or take.
Yeah.
I'd have to look it up, but I think that's pretty close.
Yeah, interesting. Well, all great things and interesting things to kind of wrap our heads around as we head into 2023, and but it's interesting to look back too and see kind of what happened this year and what were the trends and things that were going on, and will they continue? And I think they will. But this next one from Pitchfork, super important. We did another story just a week before last, I think it was, or not too far back, from Pitchfork, confronting music's mental health crisis. Boy.
Yeah. And this is near and dear to our heart. We talk about this a lot. We've lost friends to mental health issues. And this is really important. It's written by Jen Pelly for Pitchfork. And, announcing the cancellation of her Northern American tour, they talk about Santa Gold a lot. And she shared a long statement that concluded with, "I will not continue to sacrifice myself for an industry that has become unsustainable for and uninterested in the welfare of the artists it's built on." Speaking on a video call a week later, she elaborated on the overarching impact of what have become untenable demands in music: anxiety, insomnia, fatigue, vertigo, and more, and the overlapping broken system at their root.
Yeah.
It's serious. It's heavy. A lot of artists are talking about it. It's tough on your mental health to have to post things, and the pressure to post things on social media. It's a lot of pressure to create quote unquote content in a short form video world. There's a lot more pressure on entertainers, music, songwriters, performers. And people are starting to speak out, not only Santigold, but even Jeff Tweedy in this piece.
Mm-hmm. Well, and when if you've been worked around artists for a long time, you recognize that, we were talking about this a little bit earlier in the show, where it's, whether you're doing a podcast or anything, consistency is the key. You have to keep doing it. And once you step onto that conveyor belt, there's a lot of pressure. And especially when an artist hits, then the pressure is just amplified exponentially. And you really, it's kind of that catch while catch can. And it's burnout, it's anxiety, it's really, really hard. Even just touring it's this weird bubble that you're in. And, you're not quite sure what city you're in, and it's kind of the same thing over and over again. It's Groundhog Day, and it adds up. And I think just overall in society in general, it's good that we're making mental illness at the forefront of the conversation, and it's super important. And we forget, especially, and creative types tend to be at times more susceptible to this, and it's an issue that we will be talking about for as long as we do a podcast, because it's not going away, and it is a tough business, and we have to be more aware.
There's a lot of mental health concerns and issues, and long before even the pandemic. And I encourage people to read this piece in Pitchfork, and there are other artists that are talking about issues, but it comes back to what we just mentioned, that it's just the pressure now for constantly producing quote unquote content, writing, recording, short form video, socials, touring, and then, being out on the road. And there's still, COVID out there. And I think it was Jeff Tweedy that's, he was talking about that there are, roller coaster highs of performance followed by post-show lows. Mm-hmm. There's alcohol, there's a stress to relationships back home, reduced autonomy and loneliness and jet lag and disrupted sleep and pressures from managers and agents who are reliant on the artist's success, right? The cumulative effect of all of this can lead to a breaking point. So I would just, put a fine point on this by saying, if you are an artist, a manager, or even no matter what you do, if you're running into these pressures, seek help, because there is help available, and there's no shame in reaching out for help.
Yeah, I want to read this one paragraph because this really exemplifies what we're talking about. It says, in a 2019 study, it found that 73% of independent music makers experience anxiety and depression in relation to their work. In 2021, the Journal of Psychiatric Research published a peer-reviewed report titled Mental Health Issues Among International Touring Professionals in the Music Industry, based on a pre-pandemic survey of about 1,200 people that showed greatly elevated rates of clinical depression and stress in comparison to the general population, and levels of suicidality that are 5 times the average of the U.S. population. Musicians have historically gone widely without health insurance, but as with all of these long-standing problems, more research is needed. But so you've got this kind of combination of so many musicians don't have health insurance, and yet if you're out on the road or you're an independent artist, it's hard work, it's grueling, it can really be taxing. So we need to always be aware of this stuff.
Absolutely. Great piece in Pitchfork. If you need help, please reach out and get help. It's out there for you. As we kind of wind this down, this holiday episode, I wanted to talk a little bit about a really interesting note that my friend Randall Foster wrote for his staff, and it really hit home with me. He shared this message with me, and he drew inspiration from other sources. But this, if you know Randall, this message is pure Randall, and he talks about purpose. And I thought we would kind of end this episode by sharing this with our audience, because it really hit home with me, and it really kind of begs the question, what is your purpose? So the title of this piece is Purpose. Again, written by Randall Foster. He works in Nashville for Symphonic. One of my favorite people on the planet. Just a real down to earth guy. And every time I have conversations with him, I feel better at the end of it than I did at the beginning. So I'm going to kick this thing off And I hope that it kind of moves you as much as it moved us. So purpose. Why is it we do what we do? A paycheck? Because it beats working construction or selling insurance? Yeah, sure. But why do we do what we do? Have you ever thought about this? What is our greatest purpose? Creators. We do it for creators.
Creation is as old as time. No matter the religion, creation is an integral part of the genesis of all. Hinduism, Taoism, Christianity, Islam, all align in this way. Creation is key to everything, and it is the beginning of all. In the beginning, God created. Well, you know how the rest goes.
That's right. In our world, creation is the first verse, the first chorus, the first rhyme in a song yet to be written, a hip-hop beat that slaps. This creation and those creators, I would surmise, are the why. For many of us, we don't even think about it in that way, as we're rarely part of the creation, but we are the dissemination. We spread the good news of the gospel. Without us, the creation is not heard. The tree falls in the forest and no one is there to hear it make a sound. Thus, it does not make a sound. We do it for the creators.
Which brings us to the creator's ecosystem. There is an ecosystem that surrounds music, a finely balanced and oft unbalanced, unfair ecosystem, but an ecosystem nonetheless. Like all ecosystems, there are many symbiotic pieces of this whole, but without any one piece, the ecosystem would collapse. If you remove oxygen from Earth, all the animals, plants, and trees perish. If you remove only the trees, carbon dioxide creates an unlivable environment. In our ecosystem, if you remove any one piece, things do not work as well. The labels, publishers, managers, agents, PR, touring, bankers, marketers, and the disseminators, the distributors. This is that ecosystem, and we are as integral to it as the grass, trees, and wind are to earth. We are the wind. We spread the creation, the good news of the gospel.
So we show up every day. We log into our computers and tackle the Zendesk queue. We go through our HubSpot deals feverishly. We fill the details into Airtable so that marketing can be one of the best advocate possible for artists and labels. We Zoom till we can't Zoom no more, all in service to our ecosystem, to our mission, all in the service of our role in the ecosystem and ultimately to our creators.
Back to our mission. What is our mission? Mission is what we do. Vision is where we want to go, and values are at our core. North Star of goodness, our DNA.
Yeah, we will empower the independent music community by providing powerful technology, personalized service, access to additional revenue channels, enhanced marketing, and the industry experience to help realize full client potential.
Most important words here, empower and potential. Realize full potential. Simply put, we empower potential of the creators. Without us and these efforts, they struggle to succeed. We have a noble task and good task, and we expertly execute that task, our calling, our collective purpose.
So as you go forth from these meetings, enjoy your holiday break and come back refreshed in 2023. I beg of you, do not forget the integral role we play. Don't forget the kid dreaming to get out of their bedroom studio to have people listen to their music, their art. Don't forget the label struggling to make ends meet, but continuing to operate in vain because they are called to do so. Don't forget your place here and just how important you are. Each and every one of you in this room has changed an artist's life for the better in one way or another. Each of you makes an impact, whether you account for royalties, assist an artist with strategy, lock in every elusive sync license on the big TV show, or run an ad campaign that ultimately helps the artist find more fans and continues to build their career. Each and every one of you is integral and part of that ecosystem, and that is powerful stuff. Don't ever forget that.
Our mission supports the creator's mission and thus creates our purpose. Always follow that North Star. Always ask yourself, am I adhering to our mission? In your decision making, as long as the answer is yes, you are moving the needle in the right direction. And you, yes, you, are living and working with purpose, helping creators, which is the most incredible thing when you really think about it. There's nothing more valuable. Thank you all
There
for
it is.
being here in this ecosystem for the creators. I see you and I appreciate you. What lovely sentiment. And absolutely, it's a lot of hard work, and we do it for the creators all the time.
Yeah, I thought that was so eloquently put. I hope that it moved you like it moved us. And thank you, Randall, for sharing that with us. And with that, we can kind of wrap up this wonderful podcast.
Yes,
today.
in our year 2022, we do want to thank the Music Business Association, Bandzoogle, Hypebot, and Bands in Town, and my brother Jay Gilbert for helping me do this every week, and for you all for listening in. Boy, Jay and I do not take it for granted. Let me tell you that for sure. So I hope everyone has a happy, successful, and healthy new year, and we look forward to coming back in 2023 and doing this all again. So Happy New Year to everybody.
Happy New Year.
And we will see you next time on the Your Morning Coffee Podcast.
You've been listening to Your Morning Coffee, the weekly music news program for the new music business. Join Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart next time for the digital music news you need to know.